Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Dynamic Dialogue for August 11th. We're in the throes of summer, and today we're going to talk about lean supply chains and some metrics for those lean supply chains. So welcome all of you in person, and then all of you who listen afterwards. I appreciate the support. This is our weekly webinar series, open to all kinds of supply chain professionals, those interested before pandemic who actually knew what a supply chain was and who learned all about it given the situation we're in with the supply chain and with the pandemic, and to those of you who are going to be interested afterwards. We're going to keep these going for the indefinite future. So the link you had today is good for all of August, and I appreciate your support. So today we're going to talk about lean supply chains. So you can't talk about lean supply chains without going back to the very basics of the lean principles. And the principles of lean are the 5S principles, Japanese words that I don't pronounce because I usually mispronounce them. But they are 5 S's, and these are not exact translations, but in order to keep with the 5S, they've come out to be sort, set, shine, standardize, and sustain. We use those in English. You'll see a little bit of variation on those from reference to reference, but they're pretty much the same, those 5 in English. So like shine, I've seen be scrub, and I've seen set in order instead of just set. But let's just walk through those, because the principle of lean is really about trying to get rid of the waste, trying to be as streamlined as possible, and to remove the waste from the processes, from the work site, from all of that. So the first S is sort. And that really has to do with decluttering, taking things away that you don't need. When you actually do this process, usually in a factory setting, you can do this at home too. People do this with their closets and their pantries and all kinds of things. And they have a system that they reference called red tagging, which means you put a tag on something that you say is not necessary. And when you go through the process and clean everything out, you keep the things that you have that are necessary, the red tag items you set aside, and then after you've sorted through everything, then you go back and look at your red tag items and say, are these needed at all? So sometimes you have tools or you have equipment that you need occasionally. If you do, then you want to keep that close to the site. You don't want to keep that in front and center because you only use it occasionally, but you don't want to get rid of it. If there are things that you do not use, have not used, if you go back to Marie Kondo and her, the life-changing magic of cleaning out and cleaning up, decluttering, I don't remember the exact title, but she has a podcast and a show, and she says, if you don't love it or use it, get rid of it. So there are things you can keep for sentimental reasons, but she says if you're not using things, then you need to get rid of them. Give them on to someone else who will use it, or if it's has no value, then put it in the trash and recycle it, repurpose it, or whatever. So the first thing is to sort through everything that you have. The second thing says set up or set in order, and that is back to the old adage my grandmother used to say, which was a place for everything and everything in its place. So when you have a factory like that, when you have a workstation set up, if you have scissors, if you have tape, if you have a measuring thing, you have a place where that is. If you'll see different factories, you'll see those outlined so that you know exactly where those go. If on a hanging rack, hanging board, then they have outlines of where you hang this and that and the other. So you can use that in your garage, you can use that in your office, you can use that in your pantry, you can use that wherever. But these are good principles to use to take things away that you don't need and set it up so that it's usable and that it's repeatable. So the second one is to determine where everything goes and then designate a spot for everything that you're going to be using. The third S is to shine. So this is to clean up. And the idea is that you get it clean in the first place and then you clean as you go. So my husband and I did some cooking over the weekend, and my husband is not a clean as you go person in the kitchen. When he gets finished making something, there is a pile of dishes 5 times the size of whatever he made. and he's a good cook and I don't care, and he actually cleans it up as well, so he just doesn't clean as you go. But for those of you who do that, you know that when you clean as you go at the end, there's not as much to do. So the idea of shining is to get it clean and then keep it clean. So you don't have to clean immediately after you do that. So some people are almost to the obsessive compulsive side of that, where if you put a spoon down after you stir the pot, then somebody's grabbing it and washing it. But the idea there is to clean and to at least clean daily. So at the end of the day, at the end of the shift, then you clean up and make sure everything is put back as you want it to be when you come in the next day. So the third S is shine. The fourth one is to standardize, because like anything else, we want these practices to become habits. So we want the cleaning it up, we want the sorting through and setting it up to be a habit, which means you're going to sort more than once. If you think about your closet, you can go through your closet once, but you need to do that probably every quarter, every 6 months, every year, or at least every couple of years, depending on what's there, to get rid of the things that you're not using and to make sure that you're using the things as you intended them to be used. So you want to standardize those practices, make sure those become habits, and then we want to train to make sure that we have the discipline to keep things going, sustain that. So the fifth S is to sustain all of the other practices so that you have this nice, smooth flow of activities going on. So you get the waste out and you keep it out. You keep repeating, looking for additional waste, and you're able to remove that as you go. So those are the basic lean principles. Now, if we want to look at lean supply chains, we want to look at a couple of other things. So we're going to look at these kind of one at a time. Lean supply chains, one element means if they're lean, they have reduced lead times. They have fairly short lead times. If your supply chain is lean, or you want it to be lean, and you have a lot of 8, 10, 12, 16-week lead times, that's not going to be lean. It's very difficult to lean that out without reducing those lead times. So that's one trait of lean supply chains, is the lead times are fairly short. Another one is that you reduce the cost by increasing quality. You can reduce cost other ways, but lean supply chains know that the more quality you have built into the processes, the lower the costs are going to be, and that's going to help those costs stay down, stay low. So there's a lot of different things that you can do to reduce cost, but in lean supply chains, you're really looking at making sure that you have all of these features in there. So you want to make sure you're always looking to increase the quality. You want to have stable processes. If you don't have stable processes, it's hard to get that routine going. So if you go back to those first principles of like set and sort and set, if you don't have a stable process, you're not sure exactly what's going to be necessary and unnecessary. And if you don't have a stable process, you may not be sure of all the equipment you're going to need and how you want to arrange that workstation so that it's the easiest to use for everyone. So you need stable processes. You need limited variance in your outputs. So if you're a job shop and you're making something different every day, you're not going to be very lean because you don't have that consistency in your output that you need to be able to make that lean. If you're making lots of different things for lots of different customers, that's a great business to have, but then lean probably isn't the activity that you should go after wholeheartedly. You can always lean some things out, some aspects out. You want an organized work environment. An organized work environment is great for everyone. As I look and see around my desk, as I sit here and see the piles of stuff that I didn't get through last week that I've got to still go through this week. So you want an organized work environment because it's easier to work in. It's more mentally relaxing to work in an organized work environment. If you have a cluttered area, a dirty area, it adds more stress. Whether you think it does or not, they've done a lot of studies and they've shown that a clean, organized workstation is much more conducive to productivity and efficiency than those that are not. Lean supply chains also are able to send information up and down the supply chain very quickly. So if you think about different ways to send information and what information needs to be sent, you need to send demand signals, you need to send consumer preferences, you need to send information on material availability, you need to send information on forecasts. So you have the ability to do this all up and down the supply chain, which means you start at the heart of it in the manufacturing piece. It goes upward toward distributors, retailers, and the ultimate customer, and it goes back to not only suppliers, but tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers. It goes into all of the people who do the maintenance and the support of the equipment that you have. It goes through all your logistics providers, any 3PLs, anybody that handles inventory and things with you. That information goes very quickly up and down that supply chain. In lean supply chains, it starts with a culture, and there's a lot of information, there's a lot of research that shows you that to have this culture, you need to start at the very top, and it will go throughout the organization. And that culture consists of things like a problem-solving attitude, where people are looking for things that aren't working well. They're aware of that. They're not looking for problems, but they're looking for challenges. They're looking for ways to make things better. And so they're always seeking those out. It's also one of collaboration. So when they find this opportunity to solve a problem, they don't do it by themselves. It's very collaborative, both with internal and external stakeholders, because you want everyone involved. You want to get the right subject matter experts, the SMEs, that know and bring their expertise in to work on that. And you bring in customers as well. When you have that kind of environment, it also means that you have a lot of teamwork going on, because people see themselves not as an individual necessarily, but as part of a team that's working toward collective goals that are going to achieve those goals together. And the last two are agility and responsive. And we'll talk a little bit more about these, but the 7 items, the reduced lead times, reduced costs, stable processes, variance in output, limited, organized work environments, rapid flow of information, and culture, those are inherent in lean organizations. What we're seeing today is more of a hybrid, which includes the agility and responsiveness. So supply chains that are agile and responsive are able to handle more volatility. In this VUCA environment that we live in, with this volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, we need to be able to move more quickly and to handle more of those disruptions, more of those challenges. So these 2 things coupled with the lean will help companies not only survive, but thrive in almost any environment. If we have agile and responsive supply chains, those we see as more flexible, you get better response more quickly. And we know that speed is often of the essence when we're in the supply chain world and we're looking for parts, we have a problem, we have a defect, we have something that we're dealing with. We all know that sense of urgency, which means we have to get it fixed because we have a line down. So getting these into the organization is not always easy, but it goes very well with lean supply chains. So the lean process, when we define value for the lean process, this is the first thing that we want to do. We want to make sure that your company has a good definition of what your customers need, what your customers want, and knowing what they're going to pay for to help define the difference for that. If you may know their needs, you may know their wants, but you may not know exactly what price levels they're willing to pay for both the needs and the wants. And part of that is what level of quality is required. So there's a level of quality that's desired, required, and then there's something that you're trying to achieve. So you want to understand what level of quality is desired by your customers so that you incorporate that, and that helps you define the process or define the value for your lean processes. One feature that comes out of leaning the supply chain is reduced inventories. The reduced wait times, also, not only in production, but throughout the whole supply chain. So typically we think about inside the factory, we think about the wait times, the cycle times, the inventories, but when we look across the supply chain, we see a lot more opportunity. And lean supply chains have done that from the start to the finish. So they go back and work with their suppliers and their tier 2 and their tier 3 suppliers. They also work with their distributors, retailers, and find out what the end customer, back to the first part about the value, what is the customer value and how do we put those values in the supply chain without just creating a lot of inventory and excess cost. So we're trying to lean that out from the beginning to the end. So that means you have to understand the demand. Typically, lean systems are more pull systems than push systems. That's easier to manage. It's easier to keep things down when you don't build until you actually have a signal or an order to build. So we're not pushing things out and hoping that somebody buys them. We're waiting until we have signals from the customers that there is a desire, a demand there, and then we produce to that. And to that level of demand, we don't overproduce. And then also, this helps lower the inventories all through the supply chain. You're not carrying a lot of work in process. You're not carrying a lot of finished goods. You're not carrying a lot of raw. You're not asking your suppliers to carry a lot of inventory just in case. You're really looking at the demand, you're understanding the demand, and you're working with the pull system that says when the demand is there, then I'm going to react and I'm going to be able to backfill that or to fill that order. So this is a key element. These pull systems are a key element in lean supply chains, but you still have to forecast. So forecasting is looking at what you expect and projecting that out. And that's where the agility and flexibility really come in. When you have a forecast and you're not meeting that forecast. So when the demand varies from the forecast, the supply chain needs to be able to flex and be agile to respond to that, to increase or decrease to what the actual demand is. You still want to forecast, but you want to get to the point where you rely more on the actual data, more on your actual consumption rates than you do on the forecast. You use the forecast for planning to make sure that you have enough equipment, enough people, enough suppliers, that you have enough workstations, all of those kinds of things, capacity, but you still want to not build to an overproduction level. You want to build exactly what you're going to be able to consume at the price that you would like to sell that for. A lot of companies say, well, I know I can sell it, I just might have to cut the price. But once you cut the price, you cut the profit level, and that throws a wrench in all of the financial planning that you had put on that product. So when you're not getting the return on those products that you expected, then that has a financial impact that can be pretty long lasting and can be a huge hit to a lot of companies. So when the variation is small, it's easier to flex up and down. But sometimes we have wide swings in demand for a lot of different reasons. And we've seen that with the COVID pandemic. We've seen things that companies were pretty sure they had a stable demand, they had a good handle on what there was. If you look at things back in March and April, things like toilet paper, all the paper products, Clorox. I heard the Clorox, one of the people from Clorox say it's going to take until 2021 when we get those Clorox wipes back in stock on all the shelves. They've done all they can do to pull out the stops to make more product, but it's taking them a while to do that. They've bought more equipment, they've added capacity, they've added shifts, they're paying people overtime. They're doing what they need to do. But these are wild swings in from the forecast from what they were projecting 6 months ago. So that's going to take some time for them to catch up on. Other companies have seen those wild swings as well, and they've been able to accommodate that more quickly because they don't have as much competition for the ingredients that go into Clorox, one of which is the material that the wipes are made out of, because there's a lot of PPE that uses that same material. So you have to look at what your particular commodity category, what your products are, and see what that is. But the more flexible and agile you are, the more quickly you can respond, even when there's big swings, and you can get back on track for that. So you want to be able to shorten those lead times and help reduce the impacts of those large variations. Because we want this smooth flow of materials into the factory as well as out of the factory and through the retail distribution hubs into the customer's hands. So we need shorter lead times, we need shorter cycle times, and shorter cycle times mean we need shorter setup times or maybe even no setup, where we have a seamless switch from product to product, from batch to batch, because we don't want that disruption. We want to be as productive and efficient in the factory as we can be. And these small batch sizes let you change more frequently. They let you respond to those changes more readily, and they help all of that to contribute to that smooth flow of material going through the factories. So it means we have to have lean processes with suppliers in order to support the customer needs. So if you're going to take on the challenge of putting together a lean factory, a lean supply chain, you got to make sure you've got customers on board and you've got to have your suppliers on board. Lean processes have other features as well. So we just talked about the flow of material, but we also have to have this rapid information flow. That point of sale data, you'll see a lot of companies have point of sale data and they try to get that down as low as they can into their supply chains. So the immediate supplier and then sometimes the tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers actually get point of sale data from customers as well, because they use that to make those adjustments to their forecast, to what they're building so that they can respond more quickly. You also have tools like auto-generated purchase orders where you react to the point of sale. Again, in a pull system, when you get the sale, when you get the order, then you want to move to that. So you wait and issue the purchase order that's going to match the purchase order you just received from your customer. So if you have those that you can auto-generate, they're similar to blanket orders, but they actually respond to whatever signal that you tie them to. So you need this flexibility to be able to respond quickly and the agility in your material, but you also need this in your labor. So you have to have production plan flexibility that lets you switch on a dime. So traditionally, companies will have frozen windows where we make the production plan for this week and next week, and we don't change those 2 weeks. We can change it 3 weeks out. We can change it 4, 5, 6 weeks out, but we have a frozen window. So if you're really lean and you're really able to incorporate this, you have not much more than a day that's frozen. So we're going to do what we have planned today, but today we can change the plan and do something different tomorrow if it makes sense, if it's going to help us satisfy a customer, if it's going to help us get another sale, if it's going to help us meet our goals as a company. So you've got to have that flexibility in the information as well, and then be able to execute on that. I talked about this a minute ago. You need collaborative skills to solve problems. So you want to pull in your internal and external partners, stakeholders to help solve problems. And this also means that you have employees who are empowered to make decisions. So when you see factories where anyone can stop the line when they see an issue, that's a good thing. When you see factories that have employees doing a lot of kaizens and contributing to making changes in the factory, on the line, in the processes, then that's a good thing. So these are collaborative workplaces, and everyone's working to solve the problem and improve the results. And that's what you want to be a high-performing company. And you're also focused not on optimizing or minimizing the cost, but on optimizing the value. So that's why it's important to go back to defining that value, as we said on the previous slide. You have to say, what is of value to my company and what is of value to my customers? Once you're clear on that, then you're focused on optimizing the value, which means getting the most value for the minimum amount of cost and effort. But you're not worried about getting the price off of the price reduced on any given unit item, because you're not looking at cost in that way. You're looking at it in terms of value. So instead of saying, oh, I can buy 10,000 of these for a better price, and I know I'm going to use them in the next 2 years. So instead of being worried about the unit price, you're looking at, wow, I could buy 10,000 of them, but I'm going to have to handle those. I'm going to have to store them. Somebody's going to have to ship them. Do I have all of those costs included? And then does it really make sense to do that? Or do I want to go negotiate something where I can order a blanket order and maybe get multiple deliveries over a certain period of time? So it takes some creativity and some innovation. So you're not ordering, handling, storing, and transporting things multiple times, adding to the cost. You really want to be able to order infrequently, but make sure that you have your needs covered. You want to handle things once, not multiple times. You don't want to keep a lot of things in storage if you don't have to, where you're transacting things in and out. If you can keep things stored on the floor as part of the work in process, especially low dollar items where you can put stock out and put people on the honor system to move and get what they need, Kanbans, visual things that tell you I need more, then you're not adding to the handling costs. You're not storing those in an inventory situation where you're transacting in and out. And then how many times are you moving things from your supplier, maybe to a 3PL to your factory to a distributor's warehouse, or that warehouse to somewhere else, to a retail center, and then a retail center to the final customer. You want to map that out. You want to understand where is the value and where is not the value, and remove those steps that are not adding value. Because again, with lean supply chains, we're trying to get a lean process, which helps us eliminate all forms of waste. And finally, you need this culture of continuous improvement, which means all the people respect all other workers and the work they do. And quality becomes everyone's job. So it's not, I'm not looking to someone else to say, well, you didn't do this right. What we're looking to say is, this isn't right. How do we make sure it gets done correctly every time? Not blaming anyone, not looking to find a scapegoat, but to make sure that it's ingrained in all of what we do. So it's trying to take that waste out everywhere we can. There are challenges to this. And I've been asked many times, can an organization be too lean? And that's kind of an age-old question. Sometimes you'll hear people say it's very hard to be too lean. I disagree with that. I think you can be too lean. I think you have to look at what your disruptions are. You have to look at shortages. If you have lots of shortages, or even a few shortages, you may be too lean. You may be trying to cut your inventory just too much. So you might need a little more inventory to be able to hedge against the volatility. Now, if you have serious shortages where you're out for long periods of time, you need to look at that a lot more. But if you're out for a couple of days because you're just missing shipments, or your shipments aren't quite just in time, then you need to review your inventory targets. Defects. If you have suppliers who do not produce quality parts and they're not meeting your quality specifications and requirements, then you need to help them get to that level, or you need to find new suppliers, because the defects will keep you from being a lean organization. And if everyone has to acknowledge that we have these disruptions. There are going to be defects. There are going to be shortages. But you have to be able to handle those within the supply chain to keep it moving without a lot of, without too prolonged downtime and impact. Another area to look at is, do you have a lot of design changes? Remember, we talked about lean needs stable processes. If your processes aren't stable because your designs are changing frequently, then this may be an area where you don't want to lean too much of it out, because you may not be able to handle that rate of change. Do you have products? Do you make products that need customization for various customers? So you're trying to customize with different labels, different colors, different configurations. If you do, you can still lean your supply chain out, but you can't lean all 100% of it out. You need to decide what you can make lean and what's going to make sense. Because you can do this customization, which is going to add value to your customers, which is a great thing. But that may cause you to have a little more inventory than you would if you were making everything black covers and generic labels. So understand what is of value to your customer, again, back to that, what's value to your organization, and then what do you need to do to lean that out, and don't lean it too much. Everyone has machine and equipment maintenance, and machines and equipment breakdown, have issues. It can come from a lot of different places. You can have scheduled maintenance where you have a high period of customer demand, but you have maintenance that's scheduled in that time, so you need to do that. Or it can come from a broken tool bit where you've been working just fine on everything's going well, and all of a sudden you have a broken tool bit and you have to stop, replace that, and put that back together. So the way to make sure that you're not too lean is to look at this as a risk management project. So you want to manage your disruptions or your potential disruptions like you manage a lot of other risks. So when you make your decisions into how much inventory to carry, which suppliers to rely on, how much design change you can incorporate in a given period of time, you want to make all these decisions using risk-based thinking. So this is an important concept to learn, and you want to incorporate that into your organization. You want to look at not necessarily no inventory or so thin that you can't hiccup, but versus getting the inventory down. So lower the inventory levels and look at your lead times, look at the quality of your supplier, look at the reliability of the parts and the suppliers that you have when you make those decisions. Again, use risk-based decision-making when you set those parameters up, and build process flexibility into all of your processes. If you're scheduling things so that you have no ability to stop, start, or hiccup, or you're going to miss something, then believe me, you're going to miss it. So make sure that you build in some flexibility, build in some allowances so that when that tool bit breaks, then you can fix that and pick up again and get back right into the rhythm of the manufacturing without losing a lot of time and without costing a lot of money. So I've talked about lean. I'm going to talk just a minute about agile. So there's some differences, but there's a lot of similarity. And as I said at the beginning, there's a lot of synergy between these two concepts. Lean concepts really started in the 50s and 60s with the Toyota production system in Japan. So W. Edwards Deming contributed a lot to that, as did a lot of other people. But if you look at the Toyota production system, a lot of that starts with the lean concepts, and it grows into more Six Sigma and more statistical controls. The agile philosophy really has its roots in software development when that got very, very big in the 80s and the 90s. They used to have a waterfall approach where they wrote the software, but it would take sometimes years to get these programs out. And what they found out is by the time they got it up and running, it was already obsolete and had been replaced by something else. So the waterfall approach was too slow and costly. So they looked at agile ways to develop software, and that transformed into lots of other manufacturing practices. And today there's a practice called Scrum. If you haven't heard of that, you can Google that. And that's really chunking things into bite-sized pieces so that you can get this done more quickly. You focus on one area and then you put all the pieces together. So it's a very good technique, and they actually have certifications in that these days. And lean, you want to deliver fast, you want to manage the flow of material and information, and you have a small amount of work in process. In agile, you want to deliver quick, and you don't worry so much about managing the flow, but you manage your batch sizes. So the theory there is if you have a lot of small batches, then you're going to be able to deliver more quickly even than in a lean organization. In lean, you're looking to streamline your processes. You want to prioritize your customer inputs. In an agile environment, you have a lot of communication between the customer and supplier. And you get into this iterative approach where you've got constant feedback. What about this? What about that? If I do this, then it's going to mean this. So along with that, in the lean, you really narrow it down to say, if the customer's not paying me, it's a waste. But the agile is more collaborative, more iterative, saying, let's talk to the customer about what they will and won't pay, what they need, because their needs change too. So when you think about it over time, the customer's needs change, and sometimes we're not aware of that until much later. We're still working on marketing data that's 6 months or 12 months old, and yet the customers are now here and now. So the agile brings in a lot more of the current situation and gives you a lot of opportunity to discuss that and validate what the customer needs and wants and is willing to pay for. In a lean environment, we look at customer value and we're trying to eliminate waste. We have a process and everything is geared toward that. In an agile philosophy environment, we're handling unpredictable demand more quickly. We're also trying to develop new products much more quickly and get them to market. So the time to market there is much faster than it used to be for a lot of products. So we can, again, it has its roots in software where the software changes all the time. So you can see how both work. The lean system is very much of a pull system, and agile goes even a little bit farther to be more of a postponement and configuring things from local sites. So a pull system says, I'm going to wait till I have a signal before I build, and I'm going to build to that amount. The postponement uses a pull system, but it allows you to do that final configuration or that customization very close to the customer so that it's more quick and it's more tailored to exactly what the customer wants at that point in time. So now that we understand what lean supply chains are, we want to look at what are some of the metrics that we should be using for that. These are variations on metrics that you should use anyway, but when you have lean organizations, there's a couple of things that you really want to focus on. Cost is always something we want to focus on. So we want to look at total cost and we want to look at what's of value to our customers. Traditionally, companies look at price increases. They look at the cost of labor and the cost of freight. They look at overhead costs. But when you have a very lean supply chain and you're trying to stay lean or get more lean, then you want to look at the total cost involved and compare that to the value to the customers. For inventory, number one thing you look at in a lean environment is shortages, because this is where people want to be lean, they want to be just in time. There are textbooks that tell you that lean and just in time are the same. I disagree with that. I think they're very analogous concepts, but they're different, and their implementation of those is different. But lean systems typically have lower inventory levels, and JIT systems, just in time, can really make a contribution towards that. So one very important metric for lean organizations is to look at your inventory and look at your shortages. So if you're having a lot of shortages, you've probably leaned out too much and you want to go look at where those are and see what you can do to avoid those. Inventory turns is another thing to look at. Inventory turns is calculated by looking at your cost of goods sold divided by the average inventory value. So the average value of your inventory is also a good metric to look at, because you want to see, is that reducing over time? And you want to look at that separate from your inventory turns, because your inventory turns can actually go down even if your average inventory value goes up. So you have to look at those calculations and to see how that's possible, because it's depending on your cost of goods sold, but those are good metrics to look at. And then always with inventory, you want to look at scrap, what you had to scrap, what's aging, what's obsolete. So you can, again, figure out how to reduce the inventory that you're carrying to be more efficient. You want to look at for delivery, we want to look at, and the receipts, we're looking at the order and delivery frequency. I had a client once who had a part that they bought a lot of, and they ended up placing, in a year's time, they placed 63 orders for this part. And so they were getting orders placed and delivered more than once a week. This was a very small part, but it was lots of deliveries, lots of orders, lots of invoices being processed and paid. And it was costing the company a lot of money, almost a third of what they were paying for the actual inventory value. The inventory value of this part was like $60,000, but they were paying almost $20,000 in order to process the invoices, issue the orders, and receive the orders in. So it was a huge increase of their cost on managing these parts. So look at what you're ordering, how frequently you're ordering it, and how frequently your deliveries are coming. Again, you don't want to run out of things, but you don't need to get things in more than once a week. If they're inexpensive, small, easy to handle, you can order less frequently and take fewer deliveries. Packaging and documentation errors in a lean organization, they become much more evident and they're more impactful. So if you don't have things packaged correctly, if you're supposed to have it packaged 10 per package instead of 100 per package, or if it's supposed to be labeled like this and it's not, if you have, if you're buying boxes instead of cases, it can be very confusing, and because you have less inventory, less cushion, it can be hugely impactful. So those are two incoming delivery metrics. Outgoing, you really want to look at perfect orders. Are you able to satisfy your customers with exactly what they want 100% of the time? So the perfect order is no errors and total quantity shipped within that order. So that's a very good metric to use for that. Lead time metrics are also very important for lean supply chains. As I said, you need shorter lead times. You need lead times that are manageable, that will allow you to hold less inventory and to get product more quickly if you have a problem with the inventory that you have, if you find a defect, or if you find a bad lot. So, or you have to make a design change. You want to have shorter lead times so that you can consume that inventory more quickly, or replace that with inventory from your supplier more quickly. So you want to set a baseline for what your inventory or your lead times are, and then improve against that baseline. And then you want to say, what does it cost me to reduce that lead time? Many times I worked with electronic components, things like PCA boards. So if we had some components on there that were the long lead components, oftentimes a memory chip, sometimes another type of chip would be more expensive, a processor chip, whatever. So if those are the long lead parts, then sometimes it behooves you to buy that part and be able to handle that part separately from the rest of the components on the board. Many of the components were very short lead time, very inexpensive. So yes, we did have to invest some money to buy these memory chips so that they were available, but we were able to flex our production volumes up and down much more quickly, much more reliably, having these chips in stock at the supplier. We worked with the supplier to buy those so that they had those. In some cases, my company bought those parts as inventory, so we kept them at the supplier so the supplier could be flexible. So you want to be, again, it takes some creativity, some innovation, thinking out of the box a little bit. This isn't creating things out of nothing, but it's understanding what the drivers are and then looking for ways to handle that. So what investment does it take you to reduce that lead time? Quality is another metric you want to look at. Defects, anything that causes a disruption in quality, whether it's the defect itself, whether it's a problem with a part, whether it's changing the part over, if you have an error on the production line where you have a disruption from that, someone doesn't know what to do, someone uses the wrong part, someone's not trained properly, those are good metrics to track. Any kind of scrap and rework, those are all waste. Back to the basic concepts of lean, scrap and rework are waste. So what is your metric for that? Set a baseline and see if you can't reduce that. You don't, whatever the number is, anything that you reduce that is savings back into your pocket. And then reliability is another quality metric. Reliability requires a lot more to measure that from the supplier and then from your own products, but you want to make sure that your parts are performing the way they're supposed to over time. So reliability says it's going to perform in the way you expected it to or you specified it to over how much period of time. If you expect something to last 5 years, then the reliability says, is it really reliable for 5 years? If that's your customer's expectation, then that's what you want. If the customer doesn't need 5 years of reliability, then maybe you can do some things differently and save some money to make it only reliable as long as it needs to be as their expected use is. So it varies greatly depending on the product, depending on the customer, depending on the industry. And then finally, metrics for being agile, flexible, responsiveness. These are some often harder to measure than some of the others. They're not quite as quantitative, they're more qualitative, but there are some things that you can measure. Time to incorporate a mix or volume change. So again, these frozen windows that companies have that say, I'm not going to change my production schedule for 3 days or 5 days. That you can measure, and when you can reduce that from 5 days to 3 days, then that is a measurable improvement in your responsiveness, agility, flexibility. And then how much can I change my mix or volume? If I can change it plus or minus 10%, that's one thing. If I can go as much as 20% or 30%, then that is, again, increasing something you can measure to increase your responsiveness and your flexibility to demand changes. Communication, the type of communication you have, the frequency that you have, and the ability to make it timely is very, very important. So you want to look at how quickly can you send that disruption through the supply chain, or the customer demand change, or the new design change. How quickly can you disseminate that throughout your supply chain, get everyone on board, and get that available to the customer in that form, which is going to increase the customer's value. So you can, this is a much more subjective and a little tougher to measure, but it's something to look at and something that can be very important. And then look how far your pull system goes in your supply chain. If you have a pull system between you and your customer, that's step one. If you have it between you and your tier one suppliers, that's good. But does it go farther? Does your supplier have the same processes, the same mindset as you do? And that's what you're trying to do, is to get that instilled throughout the supply chain. So in summary, lean supply chains help companies meet their needs and their wants, and they give customers more value. Not all segments, not 100%, not every part in your bill of material has to be on a lean system. You can look at things and you can have safety stock, you can have cushion stock, you can do that depending on what your business is, what your product mix is, and what your customer volatility is. So you need to understand that and lean out what you can, but not over lean and be too short or too tight, or you're going to be short on things. So you want to remove the waste, but you don't want to remove the flexibility. So no forecast is accurate. So keep some leeway in there to be able to flex up and down a little bit. But again, you don't want to overproduce. Overproduce is not typically 1 to 5%. 10%, 15%, 20%, that tends toward more of the overproduction. But a couple of percent, you need that flexibility in your supply chain to be able to react to your customers' demands and needs. There are trade-offs to keep in mind. You want to look at what's the cost versus the quality. So if I do something to change the cost, is it going to change the quality? Or vice versa, if I change the quality, is that going to change the cost? Where do those show up in the supply chain in my total cost model? What's my lead time versus how much inventory do I have to carry? If I can take that lead time from 4 weeks to 2 weeks, what does that do to the inventory I have to carry? Is there an investment that requires that I do something to reduce that lead time? Or is that something I can work with my supplier to try to reduce by more frequent updates of needs, by more frequent use of their system? If I can get them to produce a steady amount every week, sometimes that's better for the supplier than making it once a month. So work with that. So what's the lead time inventory trade-off? The speed to get it to the customer versus customizing it in the way that the customer might like better. So if I really want to just get it out to the customer, that's can be fine. But if they would like some customization, whether that's a need or a want, consider that, incorporate that, and look at that trade-off. Look at the value versus cost. Again, look at your company's value, your customer's value, and then what is the cost that it might take to increase that value. Oftentimes, a small increase in cost can yield a big return on value, and that's going to manifest itself in financial savings at the bottom line. So that's a good thing to do. And then data versus information. So sharing data is not sharing information. Make sure if you share information that you're all looking at that information the same way. If you share data, it can be interpreted more than one way, and you might get a lot of different results from that, which are not what you're trying to get. So you want to look at what are your objectives, what are the key results, what are you trying to do? There's a great book that I'm reading now. It's called Measure What Matters, and it's by John Doerr. He talks about OKRs, and he worked with companies like Google when they were like venture capital startups. So he's got some good real life stories and case studies about what's working and what's not. So that's our summary for today. I'm going to leave you with this. Football season is a big question mark, and I'm a big college and NFL fan, but I don't know what we're going to get. But Vince Lombardi is one of those people who has lots and lots to say, has had that, and we still quote him. He said, perfection is not attainable, but if we chase perfection, we can actually catch excellence. So lean is the same thing. We can't get perfectly lean, but we want to chase that so that we can keep improving and we can get close to excellent results. So that's Dynamic Dialogue for the 11th of August. Next week, we're going to talk about the difference between certifications and degrees. We're going to look a little bit at the skill sets involved, and we're going to talk about the benefits of each and why some may fit some people better than others, why some people have multiples, and why some people have none, and it can all work for you in your career. You can be successful in any combination of that. And then the week of the 25th, we're going to look at building and maintaining supplier trust, why that's really important now, and ways that you can do that with suppliers, even if you've had some bad experiences, and even if you have some challenging suppliers. So you can sign up for our Dynamic Dialogue now if you haven't. And if you would like to talk about this subject or any other subject further with your business, you can always do, I think it works best when you do the http://callwithjane.com. Some browsers take the callwithjane.com, some take you into limbo, but that will put you onto my calendar. I always have some sessions there for free, so you can talk to me about how Purple Link can help your business, because there is a better way to reduce cost and risk. And we are doing CPSM exam preps this fall online. We start on September 2nd with exam 3, that's Wednesdays, and that's going to be from 6 to 7:30 in the evening. Exam 1 is going to be starting September 3rd, and that's from 9:30 to 11 in the morning. All sessions are recorded, and you can have access to those for up to 3 months after the session ends. So that's all I have. Thanks very much. If I would take questions or comments.